They found over 50 mummies hidden inside a single tomb, sealed, secret, untouched for thousands of years. Most of them were kings, but one of them shouldn't have been buried like this. His face was gone, not damaged, not worn down by time, gone like something had been done to it deliberately. His body was twisted into a position that made no sense. His brain had never been removed. His limbs were never straightened. Every other king in that tomb was buried with care, with ritual, with the full weight of Egyptian tradition behind them. This one was not. And for a long time, no one asked why. His name was Seqenenre. Most people have never heard it. He doesn't appear on the lists of famous pharaohs. He didn't build a great temple. He didn't carve his name across an entire landscape. He ruled for less than a decade. And when he died, almost nothing was left to mark that he had ever existed. But he was buried alongside some of the greatest kings Egypt ever produced. That means something. The ancient Egyptians didn't make that kind of decision carelessly. So who was he? And what happened to his face? When researchers first examined his mummy, the reaction was the same every time. Something is wrong here. The body was contorted, not the peaceful, composed posture of a royal burial, but the kind of position a body holds when it's been rushed. When there wasn't time to do it properly, his hands showed a specific kind of distortion that only develops over weeks or months of immobility. His brain, which every Egyptian embalmer removed as a standard part of the process, was still inside his skull. He wasn't preserved. He was wrapped and buried. Fast. Without ceremony. Without the rituals that were supposed to carry a king into the afterlife. Think about what that means. This was a pharaoh, a living god, according to everything ancient Egypt believed. And someone buried him like there was no time to do it right. The question isn't just how he died. It's what was happening around him when he did. Egypt, at this point in history, was not the Egypt most people picture. No golden age, no endless monuments rising from the sand. Egypt was under attack. A foreign power had moved in from the north, taken control of the Nile Delta, and cut off the kingdom's trade routes. The country had been split in two, and the pharaohs who came before Seqenenre had done little to stop it. He inherited a shrinking kingdom. He inherited a humiliation. The pharaohs before him had accepted the situation, paid tribute, kept the peace, tried to survive by staying still. That strategy had a cost. Every year the enemy held the north. Egypt became smaller, weaker, more dependent on a power that had no interest in letting it recover. Seqenenre looked at what he had inherited and made a different calculation, and he decided to do something about it. He built a palace near the front line, not a ceremonial residence, but a structure designed like a fortress. Massive walls, a commanding view of the north, a military base disguised as a royal seat. From the beginning of his reign, he had war on his mind. Here's the thing. No one knows exactly what started it. There's an ancient text, fragmented and strange, that describes a message arriving from the enemy king. The complaint: hippos in Seqenenre's pool were making too much noise. The noise was disturbing him. Hundreds of miles away. That's not a real complaint. That's a provocation. A calculated insult designed to force a response. And Seqenenre responded. He mobilized his army. He moved toward the north. The war that would eventually save Egypt, a war that would take 60 years to complete, began in that moment. He started it. He knew what it would cost. He went anyway. So when the mummy was examined and the wounds were catalogued, multiple blows, face destroyed, fatal injuries, the first conclusion seemed obvious. He died in battle. A pharaoh who led his men to war, who built a fortress, who started a conflict against a more powerful enemy, of course. He died fighting. It fits. It's the clean version, the heroic version. For a while, that was the accepted answer. But then someone looked more carefully at the body, and that's when the evidence stops making sense. In a real fight, in a genuine battlefield confrontation, a person is struck from multiple directions, randomly, chaotically. They take hits they never saw coming. But more importantly, they try to protect themselves. When a blow comes toward your head, your arms come up. Instinct. You can't stop it. The wounds that result on the forearms, on the hands, on the outer bones of the arms are called defensive injuries, and they show up on almost every body recovered from violent conflict. Seqenenre had none, not a single mark on his arms, not on his hands. Nothing that suggested he had tried to stop what was happening to him. In a real battle, surrounded by enemies, fighting for his life, a man tries to defend himself. He didn't, or he couldn't. That changes everything. Version 2. He was captured. It's not a comfortable theory. A pharaoh, taken prisoner by the enemy, paraded in front of enemy soldiers, executed publicly, as a display of power. The evidence supports parts of this. The wounds on his face and head came from multiple different weapons. More than one person was involved. And the way the blows landed, controlled, directed, from a standing position striking downward suggests someone who was kneeling, restrained, unable to move. This was not a random death on a chaotic battlefield. This had a structure to it. A captured king, brought before the enemy commander, made to kneel, killed in front of witnesses as a message to everyone watching. There's something specific about that image. A man who had built a fortress, who had declared war, who had moved an army reduced to kneeling in the dirt while soldiers watched. The most powerful person in his world, stripped of everything that word meant. It's a brutal theory, but the body supports it. Except for one thing. There was one wound no one could fully explain. A small, penetrating injury to the side of the neck, positioned directly next to the spinal cord. An injury there doesn't necessarily kill quickly. What it does, if it damages the nerves correctly, is stop the body from moving. The arms, the legs, everything below the neck. An injury like that, in the ancient world, would leave a person alive but helpless, completely dependent on whoever was around them, unable to fight, unable to flee, unable to do anything except wait. And here's where the evidence becomes something else entirely. The distortion in Seqenenre's hands, the specific way they were twisted and locked, is a pattern that develops over time. Not hours, not days, weeks, possibly months. That kind of change in the body only happens when the nerves controlling the muscles have been severed long enough for the muscles themselves to adapt, to contract, to set in place. Which means the neck wound came first, not at the moment of death, long before it. Let that sit for a moment. Seqenenre was wounded in battle or taken during one. He sustained an injury to his neck that paralyzed him. And then he survived. For weeks, possibly longer, lying in a bed, unable to move, while his kingdom continued its war without him. He had started something he couldn't finish, and now he couldn't even lift his hand. He was a pharaoh, the most powerful person in his world, and he couldn't move. Think about what that must have looked like from the inside. The war he had chosen, the enemy he had provoked, the people depending on him. And he was lying still, staring at a ceiling, waiting. And then someone came to finish it. The fatal wounds, the ones that actually killed him, came later. After the paralysis had already set in, after the hands had already begun to contract. From above, while he was lying down, no struggle, no defensive reaction. He couldn't offer one. A pharaoh, alone in a room, helpless, and someone walked in and ended it. Who? We don't know. An enemy agent who had gotten close? Someone from inside the palace who saw an opportunity? A loyal soldier following orders from someone who decided the kingdom needed a living king, not a paralyzed one? Any of those answers is possible, and each one says something different about what his final weeks must have looked like. Whether the people around him were protecting him or waiting, whether he knew what was coming. The evidence doesn't tell us that part. It only tells us what happened to the body. And then the burial. Rushed. Incomplete. Done without the rituals that every Egyptian believed were necessary to protect the soul of the dead. His brain never removed. His limbs never straightened. His face never composed into the calm, dignified expression that was supposed to carry him into eternity. Whoever buried him was in a hurry. Maybe the war was still moving. Maybe the palace wasn't safe. Maybe the people who prepared his body were doing it in difficult circumstances, far from home, far from the tools and the time they needed. Or maybe someone made a decision, wrap him and move on. There were more important things to deal with. He was the most important person in his kingdom, and his burial looks like an afterthought. Here's the thing about Seqenenre: he never saw the end. The war he started took 60 years to complete. His sons fought it after him. Then their sons. Generation after generation, pushing back the enemy that had occupied their home. And eventually, Egypt was free. The kingdom was reunified. The trade routes reopened. The great monuments of the new kingdom, the temples, the statues, the names that everyone knows, were built in the decades and centuries that followed. None of that happens without Seqenenre. He looked north at an enemy that outmatched him in every possible way. Better weapons, more soldiers, stronger fortifications, and he decided to fight anyway. He mobilized a broken, diminished kingdom and turned it toward war. He didn't survive long enough to win. But the war was won. Most people still don't know his name. The pharaohs who came after him, the ones who finished what he started, who built the temples and carved their victories into stone, they're remembered. Their faces are in museums. Their names are on documentaries and textbooks and classroom walls. Seqenenre is in a glass case in Cairo, contorted, unfinished, his face destroyed by wounds that forensic analysis is still trying to fully explain. He looks nothing like a king, but he was buried alongside the greatest kings Egypt ever produced. Because even then, even in the ancient world, someone understood what he had done. He wasn't celebrated. He was remembered. There's a difference. A tomb sealed for thousands of years, more than 50 mummies inside. And among them, a man with a destroyed face, a paralyzed body, and a rushed burial. He ruled a kingdom that was being swallowed. He built a fortress and started a war he didn't have the resources to win. He was struck down not on a battlefield in open combat, but in some darker, quieter way that the evidence only partially reveals. He lay paralyzed for weeks, maybe longer, and then someone ended it. And 60 years after his death, everything he fought for was real. The face is gone, but the war he started that survived